If you've been constipated and told to just eat more fibre, you're not alone. It's probably the most repeated piece of advice in gut health, and for a lot of people it works. But for a specific group of people, it doesn't just fail, it makes things worse. And if that's you, I want you to know something up front. That's not you doing fibre wrong. That's a sign there's something else going on. Today I want to walk you through exactly who fibre can backfire for, why it happens, and what the research actually shows. Let's start with something most people don't realise. Fibre isn't one thing. There's soluble fibre and insoluble fibre, but within both of those categories, there's a really important distinction: fermentable versus non-fermentable. And it's worth saying up front, fibre doesn't just work through fermentation. Soluble fibre also works mechanically by holding onto water and forming a gel that bulks the stool directly. Insoluble fibre works differently again. It largely stays intact as it moves through the gut, and that bulk is what stimulates the bowel wall to contract and move things along. So fermentation to short-chain fatty acids is one mechanism fibre uses, but it's not the only one. And there's a really important caveat here that ties directly into that mechanism. Fibre works even better alongside enough fluid. There's actually a trial that tested this directly. Patients with chronic constipation were given all the same fibre intake, around 25 grams a day. But one group drank their usual amount of fluid, while the other was instructed to drink 2 litres of water daily. Both groups improved on the fibre alone, but the group with the higher water intake saw significantly better results with more bowel movements per week. So fluid doesn't switch fibre on or off, but it does meaningfully change how well it works. If you've increased your fibre and things haven't improved as much as you'd hoped, it's worth asking, has your water intake kept pace? Fermentable fibres, things like psyllium, oats and PHEG, get broken down by the bacteria living in your gut. That fermentation process is part of how they work too. It produces short-chain fatty acids that can support motility. But here's the catch. If you've got an overgrowth of bacteria or archaea where they shouldn't be, that's SIBO or EMO, fermentable fibre can still contribute more fuel to that overgrowth alongside other things like bile, protein, and processed carbohydrates. It's not the only fuel source, but it is one of them. And for some people, it's enough to meaningfully worsen symptoms. This isn't just theoretical. The best evidence we have on this comes from a landmark randomized controlled trial published in the journal Gastroenterology, which found that a low FODMAP diet led to significant symptom improvement in around 70% of people with IBS. That's a properly controlled trial, not just an observation. So this mechanism has solid evidence behind it. Now, I want to be really clear about what this evidence does and doesn't show. No dietary approach has actually been proven to treat SIBO or EMO itself. Reducing fermentable fibre isn't some kind of bacterial starvation strategy because bile, protein, and processed carbohydrates feed these organisms too, not just fermentable carbs. What the low FODMAP evidence actually supports is symptom management, reducing bloating and gas and discomfort while the underlying overgrowth gets treated properly through whatever that looks like for you. So this is a tool for feeling better while you sort out the actual driver, not a fix for the overgrowth itself. I want to be careful with the IBS piece specifically because the picture there is actually more positive than you might expect for soluble fibre. A large meta-analysis pulling 17 trials and over 1,300 people with IBS found that soluble fibre supplementation improved global IBS symptoms overall and also improved IBS-related constipation specifically. So for most people with IBS, soluble fibre genuinely helps, and shouldn't be avoided by default. Insoluble fibre told a different story in that same analysis. It showed no significant benefit over placebo, and in some cases it actually worsened symptoms. So this is a good example of why fibre as a blanket category isn't that useful a term. For IBS specifically, the type of fibre really does matter, and soluble is generally the safer starting point. The exception is where IBS overlaps with SIBO or EMO. That's a specific subgroup, not the general IBS population. And it's where the fermentable fibre and overgrowth mechanism I just described becomes relevant. So if you've noticed your constipation gets worse, not better, after a high fibre meal, or your bloating spikes with high FODMAP foods, that's a genuine clinical clue, not a sign that you're doing something wrong. Now, I do want to flag something important here. If this is you and reducing fermentable fibre or going low FODMAP genuinely helps, that doesn't mean staying on a low fibre or low FODMAP diet forever. I'm really not an advocate for long-term restriction. This is usually a short-term strategy while we investigate what's actually going on and get any overgrowth properly managed. The goal is always to get you back to a broader, more diverse diet, not to keep you restricted indefinitely. Now, let's talk about a completely different reason fibre can fail. Pelvic floor dysfunction, sometimes called dysnergic defecation. This is where the muscles involved in having a bowel movement aren't coordinating properly. Instead of relaxing to let stool pass, they might be tightening or just not working in sync. Here's the problem. If you add more bulk to a system that physically can't evacuate it properly, you're not fixing the bottleneck, you're making the bottleneck worse. Bulk with nowhere to go. There's actually a really compelling randomized trial on this. Researchers directly compared two treatments in patients with constipation and confirmed dysnergic defecation. One group did biofeedback therapy to retrain the muscles to coordinate properly. The other group took a fibre supplement. The result? Correcting the dysnergia significantly improved symptoms. Fibre supplementation did not. That's a direct head-to-head comparison, and it tells us something important. If the driver of your constipation is mechanical, fibre alone isn't the fix. Retraining the muscles is. Interestingly, there's a related study from the same research group looking at fibre combined with biofeedback rather than fibre alone, and that combination showed more promise. So it's not that fibre is useless in pelvic floor dysfunction, it's that it likely needs to go alongside correcting the actual mechanical issue, not instead of it. And interestingly, there's a link running the other way too. A recent large study found that dysnergic defecation itself is associated with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, particularly methane overgrowth. So these two drivers I've mentioned, SIBO and EMO, and pelvic floor dysfunction aren't always separate boxes. For some people, they're tangled up together, which is exactly why proper testing matters, rather than guessing at just one piece of the puzzle. There's older research that backs up the broader pattern too. One study from the 1990s looked at patients with slow transit constipation and patients with disorders of defecation and put them on a standard fibre protocol. In the slow transit group, 80% didn't respond. In the disorder of defecation group, 63% didn't respond. Compare that to patients without either condition, where the non-response rate was only around 15%. That's a meaningful difference. If you've been told to just push through with more fibre and it's genuinely not working, this data suggests you might not be the population fibre was ever going to help easily. Now, I want to be really careful here because it would be easy to walk away thinking fibre is useless for slow transit constipation. It isn't that simple. There's actually good randomized evidence the other way too. Soluble fibre, specifically pectin, has been shown in clinical trials to genuinely improve bowel movements and reduce colonic transit time in people with slow transit constipation, especially when paired with other gut supportive strategies. So this isn't black and white. It's not fibre never works for slow transit. It's that response is individual and the type and form of fibre seems to matter a lot. I also want to flag something more serious, even though it's rare. If there's a structural narrowing in the bowel, a stricture or an obstruction, bulking agents can be genuinely unsafe. This is one of those situations where ongoing constipation that isn't responding to anything, especially alongside other red flag symptoms, needs proper medical investigation, not more fibre. So here's where this leaves us. Fibre isn't wrong. It helps a huge number of people, and it should absolutely still be part of a first-line approach for most constipation. But it is not universal, and treating it like a one-size-fits-all solution means a specific group of people just keep failing at the same advice over and over, and often blaming themselves for it. If that's you, if you've increased your fibre, done everything right, and either nothing has changed or you've actually gotten worse, that's not failure. That's information. It's telling you the actual driver of your constipation probably isn't a fibre deficiency. It might be SIBO or EMO. It might be a pelvic floor coordination issue. It might be slow transit that needs a different kind of support entirely. The next step isn't more fibre, it's figuring out which of these is actually going on for you through proper testing like a SIBO breath test or a pelvic floor assessment rather than continuing to guess. One last thing before I go, Fibremaxxing is having a real moment right now, and honestly, I'm all for people increasing their fibre intake, not just to move their bowels, but to support their microbiome more broadly. There's a lot of good in that trend. But this is another example of something that comes up again and again. It really is case by case. It's not one size fits all. And that goes for a lot of things. Even the newest, most hyped supplement or vitamin, everyone suddenly starts taking. Be wary of assuming something is automatically right for you just because it's trending. Ask a practitioner who's experienced in this space to actually do the work and find out whether it's appropriate for your body specifically. If this sounds like your situation, I'd love to help you work out what's actually driving it. Come and see me for an appointment. Links in the show notes. And thanks for listening today. Also, those clinical studies that I've mentioned today will be in the show notes, so go check those out.